And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flighting down to SPD off. Bring in SPD off. Off. It's orange!
Orange 45! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage. Put that in the big bag, Jingle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
This methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You dead? We don't need any more of these.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another NSF live stream from right here on the Space Coast of Florida. You are currently taking a live look both at the weather radar and Launch Complex 39A, where SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket is poised to launch the Group 6-83 Starlink mission, hopefully in just under 1 hour's time. Seeing a bunch of 5x5s in the chat, y'all, I think we are off to a good start. So far, weather pending, as we say before. But
Hey,
my name is
Max, want to have
Yes, sir?
breaking news?
Oh no!
Oh
dear.
I think we will. This is a first. SpaceX has just updated TT0 to 2:31 a.m. Eastern.
Well, folks, yeah, as we have just said, the delay just came through, and as you can see on your screen, the weather is in the area here on Florida Space Coast, and honestly, all around Central Florida. And yeah, I think at this point,
Can we admit that Max was right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
That we should have waited one minute.
Let's not.
it's almost like I called it.
Yeah, so before this, we all heavily felt like there could be another delay, and Max was making the very smart call to say, "Hey, let's wait until T-minus 57, 56 to see if they confirm or delay more, because that's usually when it happens," and it happened. Yeah.
That's just the way the ball rolls sometimes, folks. But for those of you who are with us now, I think we should do a very quick overview before we go into our break. But first, obviously, as you heard, joining us from the studio tonight is Mr. Adrian Bile. Adrian, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. I thought this very funny that we opened with the weather delayed. I think this is fun for me.
I mean, it's certainly appropriate, and we are getting into the very rainy and wet summer months here in Central Florida. But also joining us here from the field, with cameras currently bagged and covered from the rain, is D Wise. D, what's going on?
Well, as you said, the cameras are bagged. I'm actually inside right now, which is not a place I normally like to be during a launch live stream, but we've got some time. We can just chill out here for a while.
We certainly do have a lot more time to chill. And I was midway through my introduction. My name is Max Evans. I am a spaceflight photographer here at NSF, and I will be hosting when we eventually come back from our commentary break, assuming SpaceX doesn't decide to delay any farther or S-word for tonight. I'm not going to say it. But also behind the scenes, pushing the buttons and pulling the levers, is Mr. Kevin Michael Reed. And you also heard his voice of God himself, right when we went into the update for the weather. But in the meantime, really quick, Adrian, what is launching on Falcon 9 tonight?
Tonight, launching on Falcon 9 is Starlink satellites. To be precise, it will be 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites that will launch low of orbit for their Starlink Internet satellite constellation. And I will also give you some additional cool things about this launch, because this is, I will say it, not your ordinary Starlink, Max.
He
It
said
is, in fact, a record breaker because B1067, the booster for today's mission, will launch for a 28th time.
Indeed, and that booster over on LC39A is the one and the only booster B1067. And as Adrian hinted, tonight will be its 28th flight if the weather decides to behave, and 28 flights is a record. Coincidentally, its turnaround is also about 28 days. So, coincidence? I think not. But those of you who have seen the Incredibles will understand that reference. What Adrian?
It's also quite impressive on in terms of SpaceX cadence because this will already the 99th orbital launch attempt of SpaceX this year. And for the people that keep notice of the calendar, we are in May.
We are just about halfway through May. And yeah, the cadence I think at this point for SpaceX is going to be, assuming they hold pace, is going to be around between 150 and 160 launches. So hopefully we don't have anything that interrupts that cadence, but that is where they are now. Kevin, I want to ask you on air, do we go into the weather before we go into our break, or do you just want to take our break right now?
We can show the weather.
Okay.
Let's show the weather. But
alrighty.
Let me bring it up first. All right. Yep. Here's the weather.
All right, here we go. And over to DUIs with the weather.
Absolutely. So as you can see, there is quite a lot of precipitation heading our way, which is not great to see. We've been keeping a close eye on these clouds even as we're setting up. So we actually got mostly set up before the clouds started to arrive here once again with more rain. Now, as far as the prediction forecast, now it's about 24 hours in advance when the 45th Weather Squadron starts to publish their predictions. But taking a close look at that, let me pull that. Do we have that forecast on hand, Kevin?
I'm not even sure.
No, we don't.
No.
It's not where it normally is.
Let me check for it.
Well, either way, I think it's safe to assume that many risk criteria of the forecast are being checked tonight and are of concern, i.e., cloud cover, cumulus clouds, rain, lightning, winds, etc. We will have to wait.
So
go ahead.
The specific concerns that they were primarily looking at. Now, this was issued on the 10th, and so it's been a minute. But the primary concerns are the thick clouds layers rule, the anvil clouds rule, and the cumulus clouds rule. And the 45th Weather Squadron gave this launch a 50% chance of violating weather constraints, which we are already seeing SpaceX sort of working around the weather, it seems, with these shifting T-zeros.
Indeed.
It makes sense, right? It's 50%. It's either launching or it's not launching.
I mean, that's how it is every time, isn't it?
Yeah, like
either
technically
it goes or it
chance is
doesn't.
always 50%.
But it helps that they have a 4-hour launch window to work with tonight, and that is why these Starlink missions tend to be some of the most reliable to get off the ground, even though, as we have gotten used to, especially in the last 12 months or so, especially in all of 2024, we have seen plenty of Starlink missions get pushed to the end of the window due to reasons that were not, I guess, privy to us. But tonight there is the very obvious factor of weather in the area. There does appear to be a window between storms as the weather currently is moving from the southwest, moving up northeast, which is, i.e., directly at us from where it is originating. So,
hey, look, it appeared.
Hey, look at that. There it is.
Thanks, D-Wise. By the way, I think this is the most I've ever seen in the forecast discussion. Isn't this a lot?
That's a lot.
This is a lot.
Weather has certainly not been playing nice in the past week or so here in Central Florida.
Or the person that typed this up was like really chatty and was like, "No, I'm gonna detail this out."
Scrolling down, we are seeing there is that 50% probability of violation, and you can see thick cloud layers rule, envo clouds, and cumulus cloud rule. Actually, risk criteria for upper level winds, booster recovery, and solar activity are all low. However, the weather forecast for tomorrow looks actually worse and better. So there is only a 30% chance of favorable weather for a 24-hour delay window at the beginning of the window, but at the end of the window, it's up to 60%. So hopefully they won't need that. They still have some time to kill before, I guess, whether it delays or not by the end of the window tonight. But in the meantime, I think we are going to take a break, and we will come back to y'all in just about a little over a half hour to resume coverage of Starlink 6-83. Alrighty, folks. For those of you who are just joining or who have been listening in for the past few minutes, this is NSF's coverage of the Starlink 6-83 mission out of LC-39A, hopefully in just under 1 hour's time. The T0 tonight has delayed a few times due to some inclement weather around the Central Florida area, and especially around the Kennedy Space Center. There have been various lightning and wind warnings throughout the evening and into the very early morning, which is now Monday morning. And as you can see on the radar, weather does not seem to be trending in the right direction as we were hoping it would. But SpaceX still has until 3:57 a.m. local time here. That is their launch window conclusion for the evening. So don't be tuning out yet. SpaceX still has some time to work in the window to try and let this weather pass. We will have to wait and see what they do. But in the meantime, we are going to take another quick break, and we are going to be back with you guys in just about 15 minutes' time. Alrighty, folks. Welcome back to NSF's coverage of the Starlink 6-83 mission, and we do have a rather unfortunate update for y'all. It appears that, courtesy of SpaceX's website, there is now a scrub for tonight's mission due to what we presume as severe and inclement weather in the vicinity of the Kennedy Space Center. But this gives us a great opportunity to bring up our scrub merch, which you can only get for a few hours after we scrub and until the next one, I believe. I've never actually mentioned these before on stream, so Adrian or D, feel free to correct me or guide me if I'm talking about this wrong. Go ahead.
You can see that on the left, but it's ticking down 6 hours from now. Basically, you will have time until I wake up again, because I will also go to sleep after this. And once it's gone, like once I wake up and the time's over, it will be gone.
Indeed, unfortunately. That's just how the ball rolls. Sometimes, folks, that is the nature of the game we play. And SpaceX is saying that they are going to target another opportunity. I was going to say tomorrow, but it is technically today at 11:36 p.m. Eastern Time here on the East Coast of Florida. So with that, we are going to wrap coverage here very quickly. And before we do that, I want to make sure I thank those who were on commentary with us tonight. First of which being Adrian Bile. Adrian, thanks for coming on a very brief commentary stint.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. There is a very good chance I will have to talk quite a few more hours this day, because if you don't have notifications on for NSF, there's potentially an OLM lift today. There's potentially a Ship 35 static fire today. So we will see. There might be some more hours of talking today for me in the bag.
There's a lot of potential that this is a very Monday, because it is now Monday here. But also with us in the field getting gear out there was D-Wise. D, you ready to pack up?
I am most certainly ready to pack up. I'm glad we were here for the evening. It was a nice hangout, all of you. And I'll see you tomorrow to do this thing again.
Indeed. Also, behind the scenes, pushing the buttons, pulling the levers, and playing this awesome music for y'all has been the one and only God himself, Mr. Kevin Michael Reed. I am Max Evans. I have been your host for this evening stream, and we will see y'all maybe, potentially, in just a few hours for some Starbase activity. Peace out, y'all.
And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, with planet.
Water towers fly! Yes! Echo down to nominal.
Flight downside speed off. Bring in SPD off. It's orange!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
This methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You dead? Sure. We don't need any more of these.